Yes, welcome back one and all to the African Diaspora News channel. My name is Richard Sudan. Please like and subscribe and show some love and support the platform and sign up to the website. Very important. You support independent black media at this time. Now, there's something that I'm not sure how many of you in the US know about, but I wanted to shed a little bit of light on regarding some of the struggles we're facing here in the United Kingdom. Now, what I want to talk a little bit about today is the Windrush scandal. They call it a scandal, but actually more than a scandal, the Windrush saga is actually normalized terrorism, I would say, on sort of black communities and Caribbean communities in the UK. Now, what is the Windrush scandal? The Windrush scandal first erupted, it's been going on for actually years and years, but it first came to the major news headlines in about 2018. Now, what we saw in 2018 were cases of the Windrush generation, first of all, talks about Caribbean immigrants that came to the United Kingdom between the late 1940s and the early 1970s to Britain. And they were invited here by Britain to rebuild the country after World War II. Now, right off the bat, I want to make something very clear. They did not really come here as immigrants per se. They came here as British citizens. They came here as part of the British Commonwealth with passports, with UK documents. They were already citizens. They were already part of Britain. And, this story is very personal to me because my grandfather was one of those that came from the Caribbean, from Trinidad in the 1950s. He came to Britain, and these communities came here to rebuild the country, to work and to contribute. Now, first of all, in 2018, what we saw was some horrendous examples of some of those generations who were basically forcibly detained and then deported, in many cases unlawfully, illegally, definitely brutally. And this is because what Britain actually did, it lost the Home Office, the UK Home Office actually lost a lot of the UK landing cards that it had. And so you had people that had been here for sort of 3, 4, 5 decades, however long they'd lived here, been working here, paid their taxes here, had children here, had family here, had grandchildren and great-grandchildren, some of them, and all of a sudden you had these new Home Office rules that came into effect fairly recently, and all of a sudden they were demanded to suddenly produce documents to prove they had the right to be living here, even though they did have the right to be living here, had been living here, and actually in many cases the government were actually the ones who lost the documents of these people. So we saw some horrendous examples of people in their sort of 60s, 70s, 80s even, who were basically deported to countries some of them had never been to since they were kids, places like Jamaica. And some of these cases actually resulted in people being deported and they were left destitute without the ability to work. They no longer had family ties there. They'd been living in Britain their whole lives since they were children, and they were often, here they were left in places they hadn't seen since they were kids. And there are actually a number of cases where people actually died as a result. We saw some other cases of people who believed, they had everything in order to travel. They'd been living here literally for decades, paying their taxes, had their families here, and they flew off somewhere to the Caribbean, maybe to attend a funeral or something like that. And all of a sudden, they weren't able to get back into the UK because of some new Home Office rules that came into practice fairly recently. But actually, the Windrush scandal has now gone beyond that. It's now not just affecting the initial generations that came in the 40s, 50s and 60s. Now it's affecting their children and grandchildren, and not even necessarily just people from the Caribbean. We've seen examples of people that have been affected by something called the good character reference. This is a fairly new rule that was introduced by the Home Office, and what it meant was all of a sudden, there's the whole Brexit situation here, and there's something called the hostile environment, where generally speaking, the rules at the Home Office, the rules of the country have become very brutal indeed. And so you had situations now where the younger generations, the descendants like me of the Windrush generation, who some of them have committed crimes years and years ago, for which custodial sentences, jail sentences had already been served. But this new rule came into place that actually said, okay, if you've committed any crime, if we deem you to have a bad character, all of a sudden you can be deported. So you have people that have lived here their whole lives, and have children here, have lives here, and all of a sudden, under some new government rule, you're finding people paying the price for crimes committed a long time ago. Now, on the one hand, you've got the right-wing media, which of course will bring up the most serious crimes within that category, right? They're going to talk about the most serious crimes, the murderers and whatnot. But the reality is, many or most of the actual crimes that were really committed were actually quite small crimes that where people hadn't actually been hurt. You could almost say minor crimes. Like, for example, we saw instances of, there was one man from, I think he was from Jamaica, who literally committed a parking offence years and years ago, long since paid the penalty for it, and had just been a kind of regular member of the community, living his life, having his children here, working, just living life. And all of a sudden, the government decides that he's no longer fit to live in the country, which brings me on to another aspect of this horrible Windrush saga, really. The way in which people are often detained by the Home Office and by the companies the Home Office subcontracts to go and carry out these dawn raids to arrest people and shackle them, are just beyond comprehension for a lot of us. You have people's doors being kicked down in the early hours of the morning, people being shackled, taken to immigration detention centres, which are basically just prisons. And in these places, there's often serious human rights abuses that are happening. People aren't able to see lawyers. They're not given proper legal provision. They're not being properly able to fight their case. And, a lot of the time, they're the ones that are actually having their rights infringed on. A lot of the times, laws are being broken in terms of a lot of these people didn't even have a chance to appeal. Which brings me on to another aspect of the Windrush saga. You have a lot of people who were deported, and you have a lot of really great lawyers who have just been fighting their cases for free as much as they can. And we found in a lot of instances, a lot of people were wrongly deported. In other words, the government didn't do its proper duty of looking into these cases properly. It was just hell-bent on following through on these most draconian of policies. So a lot of the people that were deported shouldn't have even been deported at all. And so, we've seen this situation, this saga really continue, and it's affected people predominantly from the Caribbean community, also from the African community, almost exclusively affecting black communities, which is why people call it racist. Now, the Home Office promised to get things in order. It promised to implement the findings of a review. But actually, imagine this. Imagine that the government's own sort of task force looking into the Windrush crime. It was so bad that you even had people that were part of the task force actually resigning because of incompetence, even accusations of racism within the task force looking into Windrush, which is racist. You have big questions about the compensation not being given fast enough to victims, and this all feeds into something called the hostile environment that we're dealing with here in Britain. The hostile environment was something created under former Prime Minister Theresa May's government, and it's been continued by successive governments. The environment here for black people, for brown people, for migrants, for black British people that have the right to be here, it's increasingly hostile. There was a big spike in and around the Brexit vote of direct attacks on Muslims, black people, black Muslim people in particular, particularly black Muslim women. So anyone who's deemed to be migrant, deemed to be different, whether or not, even if you look like a migrant and you've lived here your whole life and born here, people are being attacked in the street at different times, particularly on public transport. And so the Windrush scandal is very much a sort of big blight on the country. It's a big part of the increasingly hostile environment that people are experiencing, and it's really serious. We've seen so many people, countless people really, wrongly detained, wrongly deported. In fact, on December the 2nd, there was a charter flight which was planned to leave the UK and deport people back to the Caribbean. And another sort of thing the government does, they make sure that these flights leave sort of like 2 or 3 in the morning, when they can kind of minimize public outcry. So they'll do it at an hour of the day when people are sleeping. And what we basically realized was, I forget the exact number of people that were on the plane, but a number of people were pulled off the plane at the last minute because of interventions from the courts, because lawyers had somehow managed to work around the clock for free, or whatever the situation was, and had basically shown that a lot of these people shouldn't have been deported in the first place. So luckily a number of people were pulled off the plane. And another thing is that a lot of people who do get deported, who have the right to be here, once you're somewhere like Jamaica, it's almost, you have to then reapply. Like, even if you've been wrongly deported, there's a legal process you have to go through to get back in the country, and it's almost next to impossible for a lot of people to get back to the country. So let's be clear, the Windrush reign of terror on black communities, black Caribbean and African communities, is tearing families apart. It's caused financial ruin to a lot of people. It's left people in countries they've had to go to destitute, without a means to provide for themselves. It's humiliated people. It's caused damage to mental health. There's people that have literally just fallen apart here in Britain because they had a letter through the door saying that they're no longer allowed to be in the country. It's ruined people's lives. It's torn families apart. It's left oftentimes families without a father, without a breadwinner. The list goes on and on and on. So yeah, this is a massive scandal we're living with here in the UK. The Windrush scandal. I mean, it's a hostile environment for anyone non-white in this country is dealing with some sort of many people are dealing with issues in this country that are non-white, be they people that are born here, black and brown, or immigrants, or what have you. Yeah, but the Windrush scandal is particularly awful. My grandfather passed away a number of years ago now, but he, might have been, my granddad had a passport, but had his papers not been in order, according to the government and Home Office, which, often lost the documentation. They lost the documentation which proved people's right to be here. He might have been one of the ones that had been victim of this massive injustice. And there's more deportations planned. I'm sure the government, doesn't necessarily release the details of when it's planning these deportations. But this thing is almost exclusively affecting black Caribbean and African communities, the Windrush scandal. So I'll keep you updated with this as things develop over here in the UK. But I just wanted to kind of break it down a little bit for some of you that might not know about what we are dealing with over here. So thank you for tuning in. Please support, like and subscribe to the network. This is the African Diaspora News channel. We appreciate you tuning in. My name is Richard Sudan, and we will see you next time.
Friends and family, I would like you to check out blackcommunityspeak.com. Now, blackcommunityspeak.com is a forum-based website, so something that's very simple, where you can get on, you can get off, get involved with a lot of topics. Now, Black Community Speaks is a place that's for black men and women to talk about issues that's affecting the entire community. So on blackcommunityspeak.com, they talk about topics in the range of news, what's going on in society, relationships, technology, business, food and recipes, gaming, health and fitness, music, and many more. On Black Community Speak, it's a place where you can be safe to say what you want to say without the fear of big tech censorship. So make sure you head on over to blackcommunityspeak.com and sign up today.
Hello everyone. Please make sure you subscribe to the African Diaspora News Channel app on these platforms.